Hello, knitting friends. Welcome back to the Maryland Road Trip Mystery Knit Along. This is the stitch tutorial for Valerie's design for leg 4. And as you can see, we are taking off in a new direction for leg 4. We've been working in this direction up through legs 1, 2, and 3. And at the end of leg 3, we put everything on waste yarn. And now we are going to pick up stitches along this edge here and now start moving in this direction. So to pick up stitches, I'm going to show you here. You can see there's the start your engines clue is kind of hanging out here on the edge. This is really important. When we start picking up our stitches, we're going to start right here where the color changes between start your engines and leg 1. So keep that in mind as you begin to work. I'm going to grab my swatch and give you a little tutorial about how to pick up stitches. Okay, so here's my swatch. And as you can see, I've got seed stitch here, and then I've got stockinette, and then I have some garter, and that was just to kind of give you an idea of how that would all work when you're picking up stitches with the various options. Both Cynthia's clue and my clue start exactly the same way with picking up stitches, so you want to make sure you take your work and you rotate it 90 degrees so that your leg 3 stitches that are on waste yarn are to your left. And then we're going to look here and we see where our seed stitch section ends, and we're going to pick up stitches by inserting our needle under the legs of the edge stitches that were previously done. Okay. Now, what needles should you use? You should be using whatever needles you need to get the proper gauge for whichever leg you're doing. If you're doing my leg with the ship's masts, you should be using your needles for garter gauge. If you're doing Cynthia's leg, you should be using your needles for stockinette gauge. So make sure you know which leg you're doing before you start picking up stitches. So I'm going to start by inserting the tip of my needle into both legs of that first stitch just to the left of the seed stitch section. And I'm adding new yarn, so I'm just going to fold that in half and loop it over, and then just pull that loop through the fabric, and that is known as picking up and knitting. All right, so the next stitch, you're going to insert the tip of your needle into the next edge stitch along the rows and wrap the yarn around the needle and pull that loop through. And then we'll do it again. So it's really super easy to pick up and knit stitches, and this will give us a nice clean edge here. Now, a lot of times patterns will say pick up 50 stitches evenly across however much of a space, and I always get a little intimidated about that. So I like to get some guidelines for how to space my stitches evenly. And in general, for stockinette, if you pick up stitches on 3 out of every 4 rows, it will help keep your stitches spaced evenly and keep your gauge so that you don't have puckering or waving in when you're comparing the two fabrics. So I don't know if you noticed there, I was able to skip a row, and now I've just done another 3. And when you look at the way the stitches are situated on my needle, there's actually a larger gap there. That will work out once I start knitting off of these stitches, so don't worry if there are little gaps like that. For this pattern, you're going to want to pick up 18 stitches in leg 1 and another 18 in leg 3. Those are the 2 stockinette based sections. And then you're going to want to pick up 60 stitches in leg 2. And leg 2, if you did the crab, that is also stockinette based, and so you'll still be working with this concept of picking up stitches in 3 out of every 4 rows. But if you did the garter stitch short rows, German short rows in leg 2 for the Chesapeake Bay, then you'll need to adjust your spacing a little bit on the garter ribs. And so let's see. I apologize, I used dark yarn and I didn't think that through. So with garter stitch, what you want to do is, instead of picking up stitches in 3 out of every 4 rows, at this point you want to pick up a stitch in every garter rib. Okay, so, and that amounts to 1 stitch out of every 2 rows. So if you find, you know how a little knot sort of thing forms there at the edge, if you insert your tip of your needle in there, making sure you get 2 strands of yarn again, that's for strength and stability and to keep your work from warping, you can go ahead and wrap your yarn around and pull it up through. And here I'm going to do it again. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This covers a multitude of sins. But you want to have a generally straight line as you're working, which is why we go down through the edges. This last stitch where you have everything on waste yarn is a little tricky. But there we go. All right, so that's it. Picking up and knitting. So now we have our first row done, and that's the first row for either pattern, getting all of those stitches picked up and knitted. And now you can go on to whichever pattern you prefer. I am going to knit ahead a little bit, and then I'll be back to show you how to do the slip stitches to make the masts and yards for our sailboats.